Sarah, talk a little bit about the extraordinary circumstance in New Orleans, where I don't think anybody in the country quite understands the governance and leadership structure of public education in New Orleans. How is it organized? Who's in charge?
Well, in the wake of Katrina, there were two major changes that happened. The first is that the state took over control of most of the public schools from the elected school board, although it left a handful of ones that were higher performing under the auspices of the elected board. Mm-hmm. But then the second major change is that the state began to turn over the schools to charter operators as quickly as it could, but not, frankly, as quickly as it had hoped to do so. So now each school sort of fits in one of four big categories. It's either a charter school that's under the auspices of the state, it's a non-charter school run directly by the state, it's run by the elected school board, or it's a charter school under the elected school board. So.
Okay. On the charter front, it sounds like the state officials in Louisiana are being fussy about whom they choose as charter school operators for New Orleans, as opposed to anyone can come.
They've turned down overall more applications for charters than they've accepted. There was a widely cited study that came out of Stanford in 2009 out of the Credo Center, which found that nationally charters are not performing any better than non-charter schools on average. Louisiana was one of only a handful of states where the charters on average did outperform the non-charters. And I think part of the reason for that is because they've turned down more than they've accepted. Whereas if you compare it to a state like Ohio, mm-hmm. where for a while there was a very low bar, the performance as a group there is not as high.
We have large school systems in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we are currently going through a look and search for leaders. The yes part is we have an idea of what it takes to run a school system, which is very different than saying we know what it takes to lead a school system beyond what we think it can be. And we're going to have to look for people who fall outside the traditional mold of what we consider to be a leader. Now, traditionally, our superintendents will come through the ranks, and there are great ranks to pull from. But there are times where non-traditionally trained leaders are someone that we should take a look at, and we're seeing some of that in the Commonwealth. I think we really have to come to terms that the school reform problem isn't a knowledge problem. It's not a knowledge problem. We know what it takes to work with, in APS's example, schools that are predominantly minority, or a lot of students that qualify for free reduced price lunch, or Title I schools. We know that. This isn't a knowledge problem. As I often say, this isn't an academic gap problem. This is a political crap problem. And until you deal with the political crap problem, which is identifying the right person for the right time, you won't solve the achievement gap problem.
If you're going to make really, really hard decisions, it's going to be hard to make them in the context of an elected school board. I mean, I've closed 26 schools in 3 years. There's no way I could have done that if I had people being elected in those districts. And if you're trying to sort of row against a current, 90% is about guts. The easiest thing to do is to do nothing. So depending again on what the community sees as a vision of itself moving forward, and in Baltimore, part of the reason why I was hired is because I was coming from a context that was incredibly aggressive about certain elements of school reform. So it made sense for them to hire me in that context. If with a different governance structure, a different vision of itself, it wouldn't have worked. So, you know, it's that combination of the DNA of the superintendent with, you know, a sense of the future of the district and the political elements that are going to determine whether it's going to work or not that I think are the key. I like mayoral control.
It sounded to me a few minutes ago as if Mark pretty much doesn't agree with it.
Mayoral control is an emergency, in my opinion, emergency situation, short term. It's like declaring martial law. This trying to change the culture. You're in the ditch. You can't get out by normal means. I don't see it as a long-term strategy. I can't see that a district would say, you know, for the next 3 decades we want to have the mayor in charge.